The sky had been a strange color all morning, a yellowish-gray hue that lingered over the college campus like an omen, but most students were too preoccupied with finals and end-of-semester stress to notice. The wind picked up gradually, sending waves through the trees that bordered the university, bending them with an eerie rhythm that seemed almost choreographed. Inside administrative offices, the college president sat in a meeting reviewing upcoming budgets and faculty schedules, unaware that the weather radar on a small corner monitor was lighting up with alerts. By noon, the Weather Service had issued a tornado watch, and though some professors mentioned it offhandedly, it still didn't raise many alarms among the students walking between buildings with earbuds in, drinks in hand, and backpacks loaded. The president, however, finally noticed something off when the emergency alert system in the office began beeping, a piercing sound that cut through the quiet murmur of administrative chatter. He stood up slowly, his eyes scanning the digital weather model that now showed a massive system forming just south of the region, on a path that looked dangerously close to the college. He moved quickly but deliberately to a different office, where weather briefings were monitored more closely, and what he saw on those larger screens made his stomach clench. Meteorologists were already classifying the storm system as severe, with rotation increasing and the potential for tornado activity becoming more and more likely. The radar image looked like a violent spiral tightening by the minute, its trajectory narrowing toward the very city the college resided in. Outside, clouds gathered quickly, darkening the sky, casting the entire campus in an unsettling twilight well before evening. Students in the quad looked up occasionally, some even pulling out their phones to snap pictures, not understanding the severity of what was brewing above them. The president returned to his office with urgency, bypassing small talk, making immediate calls to the campus safety director, the facilities manager, and the student affairs department. "Get eyes on the radar now," he ordered, voice firm but controlled, the gravity of the situation already taking shape in his mind. A tornado warning had not been issued yet, but from years of experience dealing with regional storms, he knew this one was different. He thought of the large dormitory towers, the lecture halls with glass windows, the open fields near the athletic buildings, all potential danger zones if the tornado made contact. He considered the thousands of students on campus, many of whom would be scattered across libraries, dorms, labs, and cafeterias, and how communication to all of them at once would be a logistical nightmare if not handled immediately. Campus sirens had not yet gone off, but he wasn't going to wait for a government-issued prompt when time was against them. Meanwhile, students were beginning to notice that the air felt thicker, heavier, and the usual spring warmth had shifted into something cooler, more ominous. Some students shared the alerts they were getting on their phones, weather apps buzzing about tornado watches and severe storm updates, but few seemed to take them seriously. The president initiated a group message through the school's emergency communication platform, instructing department heads and RAs to prepare for a potential campus-wide alert. He ordered maintenance staff to check on the storm shelter doors in the basements of older buildings, many of which had been unused for years. He requested an IT manager ensure the loudspeaker system across campus was functional. As the minutes passed, the clouds thickened into a swirling mass above, and birds had gone silent, a sign that animals sensed something terrible on the horizon. He walked over to a conference room window and looked out at the distant tree line swaying violently, his eyes narrowing as he thought of the students who might be off campus, commuting, or heading toward the exposed parking lots. A knock came at the door. It was the campus security chief, holding a tablet that displayed updated radar images and a fresh alert from the National Weather Service. Tornado warning had just been issued for the county. The president took a breath, then gave the order to activate all emergency systems, sirens, text alerts, intercom messages, everything at once. As the wail of the first siren echoed across campus, students began looking around with confusion, some thinking it was a test, others pulling out their phones in concern. The president didn't wait. He called an emergency meeting with key personnel and started mapping out how to coordinate shelter zones, evacuate vulnerable buildings, and get eyes on every cluster of students. The first drops of rain fell, large, heavy, deliberate, almost as if nature was giving a countdown. The sirens continued, a long rising tone that pierced through every wall and window, impossible to ignore now. Panic hadn't set in yet, but the pieces were in place. The college president knew this would be a defining moment, and the calm before the storm was nearly over. The moment the tornado warning officially went out, the college president's mind shifted into operational mode, guided by instinct and experience rather than panic. In his years of leadership, he had dealt with budget crises, protests, faculty strikes, and health emergencies, but none of those demanded the immediate, life-preserving decisions that this moment required. As the sky outside turned a deep greenish hue, He convened a rapid response team in the emergency operations room, a space typically used for fire drills and campus threat assessments, now pulsing with urgency. Standing at the head of the room, he pointed to maps of the campus displayed on a projector, outlining which buildings were to be evacuated and which could serve as storm shelters based on structural integrity. The maintenance director confirmed that the older science building, the gymnasium basement, and two of the residence halls had the deepest and most reinforced foundations, making them the safest places for students to gather. Without hesitation, the president ordered those sites to be activated immediately. While others spoke in frantic tones, he remained calm but commanding, delegating tasks with precision. Send runners to the library, call RA teams on every floor, get campus police to redirect foot traffic, and issue another mass alert encouraging students to seek shelter in designated safe zones. He knew full well that not every student would listen at first. Some would hesitate, others would assume it was an overreaction, and some simply wouldn't know where to go. To solve that, he drafted a simple, clear message: get a shelter now, building a gym basement or residence hall 3, and had it pushed through every alert system on campus, including text messages, app notifications, intercoms, digital boards, and emails. As the rain intensified and lightning webbed across the sky, he stepped outside under a covered walkway, bullhorn in hand, speaking directly to students as they rushed past, some still confused, some clutching backpacks, laptops, or half-eaten lunches. Get inside. Head to the shelter zones. Don't stop to gather things. Just go, he bellowed, his voice cutting through the growing wind. Some students responded immediately, but others hesitated, still unsure whether this was just another drill. The president didn't slow down. He flagged down groups personally, guiding them toward the correct buildings, even walking several inside himself. He radioed his team constantly, receiving updates from security checkpoints, hall supervisors, and faculty leaders stationed at entrances of designated safe areas. Inside the shelters, chaos reigned at first, students crowding doorways, crying, calling parents, searching for friends. The president made rounds between them, offering assurance where he could. In the gymnasium basement, he climbed atop a bench and addressed the crowd, telling them they were safe here, that the building was strong, and help was all around them. His presence grounded them. He told a staffer to dim the lights slightly to calm the crowd and to hand out blankets and water from the emergency supply closets. Over in the residence hall shelter zone, he coordinated with student leaders via walkie-talkie, giving them advice on how to calm their dorm mates, make space, share resources, check for injuries, and most importantly, keep everyone away from windows. Outside, wind speeds were increasing rapidly, and the temperature had dropped sharply, signaling the storm's imminent arrival. The president had the foresight to call the city's emergency management department earlier, and now he was in direct communication with them, receiving near real-time updates about the tornado's path. It's close, came the voice through the speaker. Touchdown is likely in the next 10 minutes. With that chilling news, he doubled his pace, checking the last few areas still exposed, particularly the cafeteria, where students were sheltering under tables and booths, and the recreation center, which had large windows and needed urgent clearing. He made the decision to move every person from those areas to the gym basement and ordered extra security and maintenance staff to help escort students quickly and safely. Time was disappearing fast. Power flickered in several buildings, but the backup generators kicked in thanks to a preventative move he had insisted upon during a stormproofing project 2 years earlier. The faint roar of wind outside had become louder, deeper, like an approaching freight train, and the president knew they were now within minutes of impact. He contacted one last group, a stranded bus returning from an off-campus event, and directed them via phone to take shelter in a local community center just 2 blocks from campus, ensuring they weren't left vulnerable on the road. He paused for a moment to take stock of everything, every building, every student count, every shelter zone, cross-referencing on a whiteboard with the emergency team. This is it, someone muttered. The president looked around at his team, their faces pale but focused. We did everything we could, he said quietly, then louder, and that's going to make all the difference. The radios crackled again with the latest update. Touchdown had occurred 4 miles away, and the tornado was heading directly toward the west edge of the campus. There was no more time. All he could do now was trust in the plan he'd set in motion, in the people who carried it out, and in the walls of those old buildings holding back the fury of the storm. He took shelter with a group of students in the basement of the administration building, putting himself last, as any leader worth the title would. The rumbling grew louder. The building shook slightly. Students gasped. A light bulb burst. But through it all, the college president remained a calm, steady figure at the center of a campus now holding its breath. As the tornado drew closer, the atmosphere on campus shifted from tense to chaotic, with fear beginning to override logic in even the most composed individuals. The howling wind created a constant, unnatural roar, like 1,000 freight trains echoing through every corridor and crevice of the campus. Despite the college president's best efforts, not every student had made it to the designated shelters in time, and some buildings were not constructed to withstand what was now a confirmed EF4 tornado. The gymnasium basement and the fortified dormitories were packed beyond capacity, with students shoulder to shoulder, clutching phones, backpacks, and each other. The president, huddled in the administration building's lower floor, listened closely as updates came through the emergency radio. Tornado has touched down, sustained winds over 160 miles per hour, moving northeast at 35 mph, impact in 2 minutes. The weight of those words was suffocating. Emergency lights flickered again, and students began to panic, some crying, some praying, others trying to call loved ones before cell service dropped. A few students had ignored earlier alerts and were now scrambling across open spaces between buildings, running frantically for safety as debris began to swirl in the air. The president immediately radioed the campus police and maintenance crew, urging them to pull any remaining students inside, even as tree limbs and loose objects became airborne hazards. One security officer responded that several students had been found huddled under a stairwell in the Performing Arts Building, a structure with tall windows and a vaulted roof, entirely unsafe under these conditions. The president gave direct orders to get them out, even if it meant physically carrying them, and deployed 2 maintenance workers and a security guard with heavy-duty flashlights and helmets to lead the charge. Meanwhile, the intercom systems began to fail intermittently due to electrical surges, and with each stutter or silence, a new layer of anxiety settled over the campus. Inside the storm shelters, students were beginning to grow restless. Claustrophobia mixed with fear created arguments over space, access to outlets, and even accusations of cutting in line for bottled water. The president instructed shelter captains, student volunteers, and staff to organize the rooms by row, calm people down through structured conversation, and keep eyes on anyone showing signs of panic attacks or hyperventilation. Above ground, the storm intensified. Surveillance footage later showed the tornado's massive funnel descending just 2 blocks away, devouring trees, flipping cars, and reducing small structures to splinters in seconds. On campus, the western parking lot had already been hit, and dozens of cars were thrown like toys, colliding with each other and smashing against buildings. One residence hall lost a corner of its roof, sending insulation and tiles cascading down into upper-floor hallways, prompting an immediate relocation of those students into the more stable basement areas. The president, refusing to remain idle, moved between shelter stations in his building, checking in with frightened students, offering reassurance, and answering questions with calm certainty. "The storm will pass. You are safe. We planned for this," he repeated over and over like a mantra, grounding students with the strength of his presence. Even in the thick of the crisis, he thought like a strategist. Where could things fail next? Which systems were still online? Who hadn't checked in? Amid the chaos, one of the most terrifying moments came when a section of the science building collapsed due to direct impact from a windburst. The president received word that a dozen students had been in that building's sub-basement but were now trapped beneath debris. Without hesitation, he called the fire department's disaster response team, already positioned just off campus, and directed them to the location. Simultaneously, he assigned a faculty member trained in structural engineering to consult via phone on the safest way to extract the students without triggering a further collapse. Time was critical, and the clock was ticking fast. The radios crackled again with overlapping voices, reports of flooding in the East Quad, trees down on the main road, a power fully lost in half the campus. The president never raised his voice, never panicked. He adjusted, reassigned teams, shifted focus, anticipated next failures. Students and faculty who saw him described his presence as unshakable, a pillar of calm amid the swirling disaster. Despite the swirling madness, the president's preparation showed its strength. Emergency kits that had been distributed a semester ago, first aid, flashlights, food packs, were now keeping frightened students safe and warm. Even the designated rally points set up months ago for drills were functioning as intended, creating order within pockets of disorder. Still, the psychological toll was heavy. Students began to break down emotionally. Some cried for parents they couldn't reach, some blamed themselves for ignoring earlier warnings, and a few began recording goodbye messages on their phones, fearing the worst. The president walked among them when he could, giving small nods, kneeling beside students, speaking words of hope, of survival, of resilience. We hold on. We stay together. That's how we win this, he told one young man who had curled into a ball with his arms around his head. Then the tornado hit the campus directly. A thunderous roar unlike anything ever heard before reverberated across the ground. Entire walls trembled. Windows shattered. Water pipes burst. Students screamed and clutched each other. The president positioned himself near the door, shielding younger students from flying dust as ceiling tiles cracked. The shelters held, but just barely. In some areas, doors buckled from air pressure, and in others, the wind found small openings, tearing through like knives. But the planning had worked. The buildings designated as shelters did not collapse. No student in those basements was seriously injured. The chaos was absolute, but so was the preparedness. And at the center of it all, moving, guiding, and anchoring was the college president, unwilling to give in to panic even as the fury of nature slammed into the very heart of the campus. The tornado made landfall on the campus like an unholy force of nature, crashing into the western sector with an ear-splitting howl that sounded like the earth itself was screaming. Trees were torn from the ground, roots and all, their trunks snapping midair as the storm shredded everything in its path. The western dormitory, though partially fortified, groaned under the sheer pressure of the wind. Windows exploded inward like glass shrapnel, tearing through rooms and hallways that had been cleared only minutes earlier. The college president, crouched with students in the basement of the administration building, felt the entire structure shudder, as if the building itself were deciding whether to stand or fall. Pipes creaked, the ceiling moaned, and the emergency lights blinked rapidly as the generators struggled to hold. Screams echoed from other rooms, not from pain, but from raw fear, the kind that lives in the bones when survival is no longer certain. Overhead, the tornado ripped a path through the science and engineering complex, shearing roofs clean off, tossing HVAC units into parking lots, and imploding walls like they were made of paper. Dust filled the air, thick and suffocating, mixing with insulation, debris, and the scent of ozone and splintered wood. The president remained still, focused, pressing a hand against a trembling student's back, whispering encouragements even as plaster rained down around them. His walkie-talkie crackled, barely audible, but he leaned in close, listening to the disjointed, terrified voices reporting real-time destruction. Building 7, roof gone, gymnasium exterior compromised, power grid down, tree through the dining hall. The reports came fast, chaotic, panicked, but the president filtered through them, identifying what could be acted upon and what had to wait. As the tornado moved over campus, its vortex lifted entire vehicles from the southern parking lot, hurling them across fields like discarded toys. A food delivery truck, abandoned in front of the student union, was thrown onto its side and slid 50 yards before smashing into a row of benches. The pressure in the air was unbearable, pressing against lungs and eardrums like an invisible fist. In one of the art studios, skylights burst inward, sending glass raining over sculptures and canvases. Thankfully, students had evacuated that wing moments before. Then came the collapse. Part of the communications building, an aging structure awaiting renovations, crumbled under the force of the winds. The president heard the thundering boom through the concrete and immediately called out to his team, demanding to know if anyone had been trapped inside. One assistant responded, yes, for students, 2 staff members, they had sheltered in the basement but hadn't been heard from since. Rescue crews, though delayed by wind and debris, were dispatched immediately. The president barked orders to make sure someone above ground would mark the location for first responders once the storm passed. The tornado, now howling like a banshee, was chewing its way toward the northeastern corner of campus, carving a scar into the land that would later be visible from satellite images. Sirens outside were no longer audible, drowned out by the storm's volume, and car alarms wailed in a discordant chorus as debris struck vehicles from every angle. Inside the shelters, students clung to each other and to whatever fixtures were bolted down, pipes, desks, tables, each other, whispering prayers, crying silently, or sitting in paralyzed silence. Time lost meaning. For the students underground, the tornado seemed to last forever, a persistent nightmare of thunderous wind, splintering metal, and rattling concrete. For the president, every second was a countdown, every sound a potential warning of collapse. When the tornado finally began to lift and move on, the change was abrupt yet incomplete. The air pressure eased slightly. The sound lessened, but didn't disappear. Rain began to fall in sheets, not wind-driven missiles, but cold, steady, and heavy. A dreadful silence followed. Not peace, not safety, just silence. And then the aftermath began to take shape. The president stood slowly, brushing off dust and pulling up a nearby student who had collapsed to the ground from pure emotional exhaustion. "It's over," he said softly, though the words felt hollow. He knew the real work was just beginning. Radios came back to life, staff checking in one by one, each building reporting damage, survivors, and to everyone's relief, remarkably few serious injuries so far. The president moved from shelter to shelter, climbing stairs now partially blocked by debris, stepping over broken glass and fallen ceiling tiles, his voice the first many students heard post-storm. "We're okay. We're going to move carefully now. Stay calm." He led students out in small groups, prioritizing the injured and the panicked. The campus was unrecognizable. Debris covered walkways. Entire trees blocked roads. The library's roof was peeled back like a sardine can, exposing thousands of books to the rain. But what stunned the president most was the sight of the western quad. The tornado's main path had cut a diagonal wound through the green, destroying benches, lights, sculptures, even ripping open underground piping. One maintenance vehicle had been flipped onto the roof of the student center, and the scoreboard from the football field had landed in the middle of a fountain. Despite the devastation, students emerged slowly, shaken but alive. The shelters had held. His plan had worked. But he didn't let that comfort him just yet. He needed to ensure no one was left behind. Using the checklist created earlier, he worked with teams to verify every headcount, cross-checking names, confirming text responses, and dispatching security to the last known locations of those still unaccounted for. When word came that the students in the collapsed communications building basement had survived, shielded by a caved-in but sturdy stairwell, the president closed his eyes for a moment and let out the first exhale of relief in hours. Still, he didn't rest. He organized a triage area in the athletic building for minor injuries. He coordinated with local EMTs arriving to assist. He directed volunteers to distribute food and water from emergency reserves. As night fell, the campus remained without power in several sections, the landscape lit only by portable floodlights and headlights from rescue vehicles. Standing in the center of the ruined quad, the president took it all in, the destruction, the noise, the distant cries of reunions, and in that moment, despite the devastation, he felt a spark of something else, pride. Because through it all, his leadership had mattered. His planning, his urgency, his refusal to wait for permission, all of it had saved lives. The storm had hit, but the people had survived. And that made all the difference. In the fragile light of dawn, the true extent of the devastation became visible, casting a somber tone over what remained of the once vibrant college campus. Rain still fell in scattered bursts, soaking the debris-strewn grounds where textbooks, tree limbs, twisted metal, and shards of roofing now lay tangled together. The air held the sharp scent of broken wood, scorched electrical systems, and fresh mud churned up by the tornado's violent path. Yet amid the ruin, there was life. Students began to emerge in groups, cautiously stepping out of their shelters, blinking against the daylight as they took in the wreckage. Some wept silently. Others stood in stunned silence. But many, once they had confirmed the safety of their peers, immediately offered help, clearing paths, assisting the injured, distributing supplies. The college president stood at the center of it all, coordinating from a makeshift command post set up in what remained of the athletic field's storage room. His clothes were dirty, his hands scratched and bruised, but he moved with purpose and control, issuing orders, answering questions, and never once losing focus. By midday, emergency services had arrived in full force. Firefighters, paramedics, and local police began rescue operations and building inspections, reporting structural weaknesses, gas leaks, and other post-disaster hazards. Media helicopters circled overhead, filming the shattered campus from above, their presence a stark contrast to the quiet perseverance unfolding below. Reporters wanted interviews, city officials wanted updates, and families wanted answers, but the president gave his attention first and foremost to his students. He made sure every injured individual was accounted for, from those with minor scrapes to one student who had suffered a fractured leg when part of a wall collapsed. He personally called the students' parents, calming their panic with steady voice and detailed update. Over the next several hours, he continued to walk the grounds, speaking with students, faculty, and staff, offering words of hope, thanking them for their courage, and reminding them that they had survived something most never would experience in a lifetime. Tents were erected for temporary shelter. The gymnasium was converted into a central relief zone. Electricity remained out in large swaths of campus, But generators powered critical systems, and volunteer electricians worked alongside emergency crews to restore basic services. Food trucks arrived, rerouted by the president through the city's emergency response network, serving hot meals to students and staff. Donations from the local community began pouring in: blankets, toiletries, clothes, even cell phone chargers, all coordinated under the president's oversight. Student leaders, inspired by the president's example, began organizing cleanup crews and emotional support groups. In every corner of the campus, one phrase began to repeat: "He saved us." It echoed in hushed conversations, in tearful phone calls, in text messages sent across the country. The college president saved us, not with superhuman strength, but with calm, decisive action. With foresight, compassion, and relentless commitment. News stations began running continuous coverage of the disaster, and while they highlighted the destruction, they also spotlighted the heroism. Footage showed the president walking alongside students in the rain, helping clear rubble, giving interviews only when pressed, always redirecting praise to his team and the students themselves. "We prepared for this," he said in one clip. "This is what preparation looks like when it meets leadership, community, and courage." The governor visited the campus 2 days later, declaring it a state disaster zone and promising federal support. In a brief ceremony under a white canopy surrounded by crushed stone and bent flagpoles, the governor shook the president's hand, thanked him publicly for his actions, and referred to him as a leader in the truest sense of the word. The crowd of students, still disheveled, many wrapped in blankets or raincoats, applauded loudly. For many, it was the first time they had smiled in days. As rebuilding plans began to take shape, the president continued to lead not from behind a desk but out in the field. He held meetings under temporary tents, helped catalog damage with clipboard in hand, and stayed overnight in campus shelters to remain close to the students who hadn't yet been able to return home. He personally wrote a letter to every parent, detailing the events, the efforts taken, and the commitment to full transparency and recovery. When a student group suggested building a memorial to remember the day, not for the destruction, but for the unity and survival, the president approved it instantly. Plans for a circular garden, benches made from salvage wood, and a central plaque began to take shape. The plaque would read, "In the face of the storm, we stood together. We were led with courage. We survived." Weeks passed. The debris began to disappear. Buildings were condemned, others repaired. Classes resumed in modular classrooms, and power was fully restored. And through it all, the president remained visible, not as a symbol, but as a worker among workers. He listened to student concerns, supported grieving staff, and helped plan mental health services to deal with the trauma the community had endured. National media eventually moved on, but inside the campus, the memory lived fresh. For the graduating seniors, their commencement speech came from none other than the college president, who stood on a temporary stage surrounded by scaffolding and flowers. "You have faced the unimaginable," he told them. "You have seen what fear looks like, and you did not let it break you. This diploma is more than a degree. It's proof that even in darkness, we find each other. We rise, and we rebuild." As applause thundered across the campus green, now lush again and blooming with spring, students stood and cheered not just for the moment, but for the man who had seen them through their worst day. There were no grand monuments erected to him, no buildings renamed. But the impact was lasting, ingrained in the hearts of everyone who had lived through the storm. He had been their anchor, their guide, their calm. The college president had saved lives not by fate or luck, but by acting when it counted, with every ounce of strength and heart a person could offer. And though the tornado had left its mark on the land, it had also revealed something deeper: the enduring strength of a community led by a man who refused to break when the winds rose. The storm passed, but the legacy remained, as steady as the man who stood at the eye of it all.